Your 20s are a very decisive time of your life. This is when many people make or break the trajectory of their lives. During primary and high school, there isn't really much you can do. You're stuck in the school system, and unless you fit some specific criteria, you aren't allowed to work until you're 15. And even then, you work a handful of hours a week at most. So everyone has relatively the same level of progress in their education/careers and money. Some dudes start going to the gym, maybe some do side businesses, some might have more money due to their parents, but all in all, most people are at the same spot in life. Around when you turn 18, you graduate. You'd have some guys who dropped out 2-ish years ago and started a trade in which they're already halfway through their apprenticeship, so they're ahead in terms of their careers and money. Some start uni, some do whatever. Paths start to really diverge here. By the time 21 comes around, the tradies are already qualified and on good income. Many uni degrees are just finishing, so they're just starting with grad positions on grad salaries now. But some people just went traveling, living their best life. Some bummed around, some did useless degrees. By the time 25 to 30 rolls around, the paths in life have differed drastically. Some are finishing their doctoral degrees. Many white-collar uni professionals are now getting established in their careers. The tradies have been killing it for a while. Some people are still bumming around. Some people are going through really bad relationship breakups. Who knows? The different paths in life are an entire topic for another video. But what I'm getting at is, people's income levels in their 20s vary drastically due to decisions they made in their earlier years. However, for me, I've done the math, and I'm almost $300,000 ahead of schedule compared to what someone else who chose my path should be, compared to what society says. What I mean by this is, people will say, "Oh, you're 20, why aren't you working full-time yet if you weren't at uni? Oh, you're 25, why haven't you moved out of home yet? Oh, you're 30, why aren't you married yet?" type thing. So if I had listened to societal standards, I'd be $300,000 behind where I am right now. And I'm going to go over the math involved. You'll also note that this $300,000 acceleration happened over only 4 years too. So maybe you can draw ideas from what I did so you can get further ahead in a short period of time. Now, before I go into this, I won't really be discussing salary, because then you could just easily botch numbers and say, "Oh well, I was meant to be on this lower salary, but I actually got a higher raise than expected." My 9-to-5 career in accounting played a minor role for the sake of this video. You'll know what I mean later in the video, but any standard, stable, full-time job would fulfill the same role. And it's also a path that some people are already on in their 20s, regardless of what society says. The numbers will be primarily based around 3 key decisions I made, and one of those decisions is kind of dependent on having a 9-to-5 career, but for this video, one of my other decisions actually feeds into me being able to make this other decision. If you're confused, you won't be by the time this video is done. But just know I'm not going to say something like, "Oh, I picked a degree in accounting, so now I earn a lot more than what I would have if I didn't." That's not what this video is going to be about. So let's start off with point 1, your living situation. I made a video on me being 28 and living at home still, and in that video I went over some math, so I'll briefly touch on that math again since it's relevant to this topic. Don't worry, it's not going to be a total repeat of that video, and points 2 and 3 are not really related to my living situation. Point 3 kinda is, but kinda not really. So when you're 24, in Western countries at least, it's expected that you move out of home. At least, it was. It's less taboo being at home later these days, since I know living at home in your 30s and beyond is actually common practice in other countries that aren't the US, UK, Canada, Australia, maybe New Zealand. But anyway, in my country, Australia, you're kind of expected to have moved out by now. But I didn't. I chose to stay at home. So let's start the rent counter, shall we? We may as well use the figures from my 28 and live at home video. Now, depending on if you want to live with roommates or if you want to live on your own, your rent amount will change, obviously. I've seen some videos on people talking about their money-saving tactics, and they counted the rent they saved by living with roommates as opposed to on their own, and they counted this extra variance as savings, which is correct. This is a savings method. However, in my case, where I wasn't living with roommates or on my own, it's tough to determine exactly how much I technically saved. Do I calculate what I save by not living on my own, or do I calculate what I save by living at home instead of with roommates? I'll do a running tally of both. There's basically a $40,000 difference over 4 years between the two. So if rent was $250 a week, which is probably reasonable living with roommates, I would have spent around $60,000 in rent in 4 years. If I lived on my own, I would have spent over $100,000 in 4 years, assuming rent was $450 a week. These calculations actually went up to $300 a week for roommates in year 2 and $500 a week for living on your own in year 2. So sorry if the image is confusing. Basically, year 1, rent was $250 or $450. Years 2, 3, and 4, rent was $300 and $500. This also assumes rent was this cheap, which it's probably not because this is Australia. And it also assumes rent stayed the same in year 2, 2022, and beyond. Spoiler alert, that definitely didn't happen in reality, so you could add on higher figures to these numbers, but we'll keep it simple for now. So decision 1, living at home instead of moving out, saved me either $60,000 or $100,000 in 4 years, assuming rent was this cheap, which it wasn't. So how does this put me ahead? Well, because general expectations of a 24-year-old is to move out of home. So by deciding to stay at home instead, I'm $60,000 or $100,000 ahead in my 4th year since this decision. Decision 2, working a second job. How is this putting you ahead of schedule? Because basically everyone quits their part-time jobs as soon as they start their full-time jobs. Makes sense. You have one higher-paying job with more hours now. Why keep the lower-paying part-time one? Many people's part-time roles don't suit their full-time position anyway. Maybe some of their part-time job hours were during the weekday, in which now that's been taken up by the full-time job, or their full-time job involves random hours like nursing or policing. So it's expected you quit that part-time role when you start your full-time one. I didn't do this. I stuck with a part-time role. So my full-time role is in accounting, a stable, consistent 9-to-5 job, unless you work in public accounting, especially the Big Four. Then you are definitely not doing the standard 38 to 40 hours a week. You're doing way more. But in industry, your hours are pretty standard. So I didn't pursue nursing/teaching/ some trade that involves random hours. I can slot in a part-time job around it. I guess you could do a part-time job with teaching, but you'd run into some Karen parents who would see you stacking shelves at the supermarket on a Saturday after you were teaching their kid on the Friday, and they'd have some complaints about it. You could get this with most industries, but my 2 jobs are so far apart from each other that it's rare that I'll encounter someone at both jobs that knows me working at both jobs, if that makes sense. But the point is, in my situation, I can slot a part-time job around my full-time job. What was my part-time job? It's at a supermarket. So they have more varied hours than other part-time jobs, aka you can work a few hours at night or on the weekends. Restaurants have a similar thing going. There aren't really many hours during the weekday, but at night or weekends, there's plenty of hours. So if you have a standard 9-to-5 weekday gig and want a job that could fit around your job, try bartending or something. The Friday/Saturday night/Saturday/Sunday daytime jobs, they work well around the 9-to-5. Fast food is also good for this. Put those fries in the bag, bro. Putting those fries in the bag gets you the bag. Cha-ching! Their hours are even more flexible than supermarket hours, since they're open even later. At least they are here in Australia and my region, and the shifts are a bit more flexible. With a supermarket, they kinda have set shifts, and you can't do much about them. Example, there's no 3:30 to 6:30 Saturday shift. There's 5 to 10, or 3 to 8, or 3:30 to 8:30. Maybe it's good if you want more hours, but if you only want a little extra money and more free time, with supermarkets, yes, there's some flexibility, but not as much from fast food joints from what I've seen. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's different where you're from, but in my area, you can get like a 4:30 to 8 shift on a Saturday at McDonald's. You can't get that at a supermarket. The only instance where you can is if they call you into work because someone called in sick and they're desperate for hours. Then you can kind of demand your hours, but as for set rostered standard shifts, nothing you can really do. But usually, you don't have as much flexibility with your shifts at supermarkets versus fast food. Warehouses are also a potential second job, but some warehouses require you to have start times at like at 3 a.m. on a Saturday morning, since you need to get the stock delivered to the supermarkets in the morning. If you find warehouse jobs that are more lenient with their hours, go for it, but any warehouses within a somewhat reasonable distance from me, under 1 hour, their required hours are outrageous. At least my supermarket hours are still roughly in line with my 9 to 5. So to the point of this video, working more than the expected 38 to 40 hours per week over the past 4 years, how has this contributed to me being around $300,000 ahead of where I should be? Well, obviously, the additional money I earned in the span of those 4 years. So in year 1, 2021, I started my full-time job, and society expects you to quit your part-time job when you start your full-time job. I kept my part-time job, and in that first year, I made almost $30,000 extra from my second job at WageWorths. In year 2, 2022, I made almost $35,000 extra from the Wagey job. In year 3, I made almost $31,000 extra, and in year 4, I made almost $33,000 extra. So tallying up the total income earned from this secondary job over the span of those 4 years, that's $127,940.63 extra, just from an extra job, just in 4 years. Just think, if I had gone down the standard route of quitting your existing temporary job when I got a full-time one, I'd have earned almost $130,000 less in the span of 4 years. So adding this $130,000 amount, let's just round for simplicity and add on an extra $60,000 in savings in those 4 years from staying with my parents, the OG roommates, instead of conventional roommates. That's a $190,000 difference in 4 years. And if you use calculations based off living alone, that's around a $230,000 difference in 4 years. $130,000 in income, $100,000 in expenses over 4 years. Going over this math really puts into perspective how hard it is for the current generation to get ahead. I only managed to get ahead by working a second job, something that shouldn't be required, and living at home for a lot longer, something that also shouldn't be required. But that's crazy. A $190,000 to $230,000 difference in the span of only 4 years. But we're not done yet. We haven't talked about Decision 3. Decision 3, buying land/real estate. How is this a decision that puts you ahead? Shouldn't buying land/real estate be on the same expected path in the game of life? How is this a different path? Well, the conventional path is buy something small first, then work up to a bigger place. Or waiting for a dip in the market. This one isn't as common, but I have seen it mentioned often. Oh, the real estate market is in a bubble, just wait to buy. There'll be a crash soon, bro. Maybe in other countries, but not Australia. We have different fundamentals. The market had boomed during 2020 to 2021, and you already heard people saying, don't buy now, prices are overinflated. Well, since my purchase, my block of land has gone up by $50,000, from $325,000 to $375,000. Buying at today's prices instead of 2021 means I need to cough up an extra $50,000. So going against the grain of buying something bigger first instead of buying something smaller, which would have had less potential for capital growth, and buying despite people saying things are too inflated has put me an extra $50,000 ahead. Also, the only reason I can afford the property/land I got was because of the extra income from my second job. I literally couldn't afford the down payment or get the ability to service the mortgage on this property without the income from the second job. Obviously, I also needed my accounting job, the first one as well, but I couldn't get this land that I got with the one job alone. So Decision 2 basically also fed into Decision 3. So adding $50,000 onto the prior figures, $190,000 plus $50,000 equals $240,000 ahead, or $230,000 ahead from living on your own instead of with roommates, plus $50,000 equals $280,000. Depending on how you want to slice it, 3 decisions I made that went against the grain resulted in me being an extra $240,000 to $280,000 ahead. And these decisions only panned out over the space of 4 years. You could delve further and dissect how much your investments grew or whatever, but that's not really advice that goes against the grain. Everyone tells you to invest, but not everyone tells you to live at home, not everyone tells you to work a second job, and not everyone tells you to buy into a hot property market. So 3 unconventional decisions bundled together over the span of only 4 years has gotten me anywhere between $240,000 to $280,000 ahead of where I would be if I had followed the normal path. And keep in mind, the rent figures are likely undercutting it too, So you could easily add another $10,000 to $25,000 over the span of 4 years in savings for this. So you might be wondering, these are huge changes that occurred between the ages of 24 to 28. What about your earlier years? What about the ages of 20 to 24? Could you have gotten even further ahead of schedule if you included these years? Well, in another video, I'll talk about how I was actually $200,000 behind where I should be in life, maybe more. So this video went over how the years of 24 to 28 rapidly accelerated my wealth journey, and in the next video, I'll talk about how between the ages of 20 to 24, I made a series of bad decisions that caused me to be $200,000 behind where I should have been at the age of 24. So stay tuned to see my bad decisions. Thanks for watching. That is all.